So last time, well, 2 times ago when we did this, we had a new question, which was this. It was something like, because I don't remember the exact wording, but it was, how does the mythology of Hades and the underworld influence or play into the New Testament ideas about the afterlife? This is a good question because Hades is mentioned 10 times in the New Testament, and we know Hades as like the Greek god of the underworld, right? But nevertheless, it's mentioned like as a place that people go in the New Testament quite often, which is kind of weird. It's also 108 times in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. So it also brings up larger questions about the influence or development of afterlife theology over time. So this is one of my longer little lectures. For the Old Testament, one of the sources that I found most helpful for this was this book, Ancient Near Eastern Thought in the Old Testament by John Walton. John Walton was one of my professors in grad school, so it's really good. I would recommend it for if you want to understand like the cultural backgrounds of the Old Testament. So the Old Testament, this is helpful to know, is that the Old Testament describes the realm of the dead in many ways that are similar to the cultures near them, and in some ways that are very different. And of course, this is kind of what you would expect, right? If you had a God who came down and spoke to us, right? He's going to speak to us in language that we understand. Because, even just by speaking Hebrew, right, God is kind of condescending. He's becoming one of us by speaking a language that we can understand. Like, he could just, like, speak some weird heavenly language that we don't know. But instead, and just by doing that, he's kind of accommodating himself to human culture. So at the same time, right, God is also tells us things that other cultures just don't even begin to get, right? Like, so he's both transforming us and accommodating to us at the same time. So it shouldn't be surprising that the Old Testament describes the realm of the dead in many ways that's similar to its culture, and then also in ways that are different. Israel lived in slavery in Egypt, the Levant, and Babylon. So all those three kind of have influences on how the Old Testament kind of thinks of the realm of the dead. The Levant. So it's French. It's a French Levant because I think the French kind of had at one point were in charge of parts of the Middle East, and so that area is still kind of called the Levant in scholarship. I don't know really the exact story around that, but I don't know.
Maybe the term is Mesopotamia?
Well, the Levant would be it's south of Mesopotamia, so that's like basically the area between Lebanon and Israel and
Syria.
it is Syria partially, basically on the coast of the Mesopotamian Sea. The east coast of the, not Mesopotamian, Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so Egyptian afterlife, we have like tons of sources on how the Egyptians thought about their afterlife because that's like their obsession. We have these pyramids, and these are tombs for the pharaohs. We have all kinds of writings, which were ways to get the pharaoh through the afterlife. So most of their architecture that actually survives for us, of course, there's a little survivor bias there. Most of the architecture that survives for us is about the afterlife, and so that's really helpful for us. The problem of death for the Egyptians is that the personality or the soul and the body are separated. So, like, there's the essence of who you are, and there's your body, and when you die, those are separated. That's kind of how the Egyptians thought of it. So the goal of the afterlife is to reunite the body with the soul, and so they kind of go on this big, long journey through the afterlife to reunite the body and the soul. And of course, I'm like very roughly translating the two Egyptian words ba and ka. So that's like probably not an exact definition, especially because I'm not an expert on Egyptian theology. So for instance, mummification is a really big part of that, or the opening of the mouth ceremony is where they kind of open the mouth of the dead person so that like their soul can be reunited with their body. So at first, the afterlife was open only to pharaohs because only they could be mummified, and they were the only ones really rich enough to kind of go through that whole process. And then over time, more and more common people, including just mostly rich people, were mummified and therefore had a hope for the afterlife. So the afterlife is a journey to reunite with the soul. It begins with the opening of the mouth or reanimation. So this is the weighing of the heart ceremony. So it's weighed, the heart is weighed against a feather in the hall of Ma'at. Ma'at is the god of justice. If the heart is lighter than a feather because it's good, the person can continue in the afterlife. Otherwise, they're eaten by a monster. So that's kind of the. So the best case scenario is reunification or back to normal after death. And it's only possible if you're rich and righteous. So if you're a good person who's also rich and can afford mummification, you could get back to kind of life after death, almost like normal. Mesopotamia or the Levant, generally the Levant, of course, kind of has a lot of similarities to Mesopotamia. They tend to be a little bit closer to Israel than Egypt. For them, the realm of the dead is terrible for everyone, but somewhat better for kings. So the most common kind of description of the afterlife is a place where people eat dust, right? It's not a good place to be. There's no judgment. So in other words, like it's just bad whether you're a good person or a bad person. Everyone goes down to the realm of the dead, and you're not going to really enjoy it. So you take a long, treacherous journey to the netherworld, and when you get there, it's not fun. So this is from 1500 BC. This is a religious text called the Descent of Ishtar. It's about a goddess named Ishtar, who's the goddess of sex, war, and of fertility, sex, and war. And she, the story is that she goes down into the netherworld, and when that happens, like nothing is fertile, there's no sex, and there's no war. So like it's like this terrible, terrible thing, especially because war is kind of a good thing in their culture. And she goes down into the netherworld because she's like technically died to visit her sister there. So this is a description from that. To the house whose entrance are bereft of light, where dust is their sustenance and clay their food. They see no light but dwell in darkness. They are clothed like birds and wings for garments, and dust has gathered on the door and the bolt. Just not a great place to be, the Descent of Ishtar. Now, caring for the dead, just like the Egyptians, caring for the dead is a really big deal. So as opposed to the Egyptians who believed that the problem of death is the separation of the soul, the essence, from the body, the problem of death for the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians, the Levant, is that it's a separation from community, that you are away from your family, right? So the living can actually improve the lot of the dead with proper burial and proper care. So if you've, like, for instance, seen, like, the Day of the Dead, right, like, part of it is that, like, you can somehow improve the lot of the dead by remembering the dead, like, some way or another. Similarly, that it's the same kind of idea in Mesopotamia and the Levant. The living can provide food and vitality to the dead through memory and offerings. Otherwise, of course, the dead are eating dust and mud and stuff, and you don't want that. So family is everything, both in life and in death. A family gives someone who to take care of you both in life and in death. It's both community and it's also kind of a social security system, right? Like you need family or else not only in life you'll struggle, but you'll struggle in death as well. So therefore, the cult of the dead or taking care of the dead is really important. Moreover, the dead are spirits, and they can help you, right? If you take care of them, they can also haunt you and treat you poorly if you don't. So necromancers are these group of people who can summon the spirits of the dead up, right? You find it actually in the Bible. There's a book in 1 Samuel. We went over this. When Saul visits a witch and she like brings up the spirit of Samuel to talk to him. So it's also extremely dangerous. Like they believed that they really did have this power to bring up the spirits of the dead, and that's a dangerous thing. You don't want to be playing with that just willy-nilly. So if you don't take care of the dead, they can make your life worse, especially ghosts that are either improperly buried, remembered, or unfed. So one of the most important things that you can know is that the cult of the dead is largely banned in the Torah, but Israelites obviously practiced it all the time. I mean, Saul just happens to go by and see a necromancer, right? That's just like part of his culture, right? So even though it's banned in the Torah, that doesn't mean they didn't practice it. Moreover, it's important to know that like the reason the Torah bans this isn't because like there's charlatans who can't actually summon the dead. They really did believe that you could summon the dead, like necromancers could do this. It's just that you shouldn't because it's bad, like it's dangerous. disrespectful. It's putting your trust in dead people instead of God. Like there's all kinds of reasons, but none of them really are that it doesn't work. So this is the story of Saul and the witch from Endor. Finally, remaining on the land of your ancestors allows you to make offerings on their behalf. So if you fail to properly bury someone, if you're not properly buried on your land, then you're doomed to wander without the help of the living. So being driven off your ancestral land or selling off your property spells the doom of your bloodline. So that's a really important thing. For instance, in the book of Ruth, when they have to leave their homeland to go to Moab, right? They're in some sense like bringing doom to their bloodline, right? Or and it's such a big deal that they manage to redeem, to repossess their land in the end. That's like a huge relief, in large part because it means they can take care of their dead. Finally, the purpose of humans is to serve basically as cosmic butlers for the gods. So the gods have a lot of work to do. They don't really feel like doing work, so they created humans to do their work for them. That's more or less a pretty good summary of Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation story. So humans in the netherworld can't grow food or serve the gods, so the gods really don't care about humans in the netherworld. So they can't, it's basically like, why do I care about, my phone that doesn't work anymore? I'll just throw it away. Like, who cares, right? Same way, like, why would they care about humans who can't serve them in the netherworld? We'll just throw them away and we don't care about them, right? Shamash, the god of the sun, rules over humans in the netherworld, basically to keep them from getting in trouble or being too annoying. In fact, if you read the Babylonian story of the flood, Atrahasis, the whole story is about how like humans had gotten really annoying and noisy, and because they were so noisy, we needed to do something about it, so we sent the flood. Right? That's kind of the story there. So really, like your goal as a human in relation to the gods is to be not very annoying and super helpful, and then the gods will be fine with you. Otherwise, it's not good, So let's kind of, talking through the Old Testament, let's talk about like a couple verses which I think are really helpful for understanding. So this is Deuteronomy 30. Fred, do you want to read, Therefore Choose Life?
Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them.
Yeah, so why is it so important that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers for your whole life? Why is that so important? You gotta take care of your dead ancestors. That's really one of the big reasons, right? So it's helpful to understand the afterlife, not just for when the Old Testament talks about the afterlife, but for a whole lot of other things too. How about, so you shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. So the Old Testament assumes the immigrants are desperate, and why is that a fair assumption? They're not on their land, and that's a huge deal. Like if you're leaving your land, that means that you you really had to. There's no reason why you would leave your land, even just for like, I can make more money here, right? That was a really big deal.
So, I just want to interject.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why even today, we are so committed to owning land?
Right.
And we have such a hard time understanding cultures.
Right.
Like the Gypsy culture, the Romans, the travelers.
Right.
Who don't believe that you own land, that you just have family.
Yes, that is actually a theory. I forget who that was, but there was a theory from a book. I think it might be something called the Eternal City that the idea of like property ownership is really important to cultures that had some relationship to the Romans, because the Romans had a very similar idea of the cult of the dead, that you needed to have a relationship with the dead in order to kind of take care of them. Yeah, so that is a very strong theory in scholarship. Yeah. Go ahead, Kay.
But with Native Americans, they don't believe you can own the land.
Right.
They're custodians of the land.
Right.
And it's handed down
Yeah.
Start to carve up, and you can't own the land, it's not yours to own.
Right. Yeah, so Kay, for the people online, Kay brought up that Native American culture, they had very different ideas of property ownership, that in fact you really can't own the land. And that, again, along with Peggy's theory, right, that might come from the idea that they didn't really have the same afterlife theology that the West kind of had, which is a really interesting thing. I really like that theory. Good.
Well, it's also
Gustave Coulange, I think, is the name of the author. Anyway, go ahead.
saying, it's also probably one of the reasons why there's so much discord around Israel and the Palestinians.
Right.
Because they're of the same culture, that's their land.
Yeah, and even if they don't necessarily, like, so for people online, Isabel mentioned the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the ownership of land being so central to that. Yeah, and even if they didn't if they don't have that same afterlife theology even now, right, the idea of home ownership, of property ownership, still has transferred over the course of millennia, and has played into that kind of conflict. So let's take a look at a few texts from the Old Testament to see how the afterlife is similar or different to its cultural context. I'll read. This is Job 10. Before I go, and I shall not return, to the land of darkness and deep shadow, to the land of gloom like thick darkness, like deep shadow without any order, where light is as thick as darkness. So this is Job talking about how he's miserable and he's going to die, and I mean, that's basically the life that he's in. And he may as well be dead now, because that's how dark and bleak his life is. How do you notice any similarities or differences to the ancient Levant and Mesopotamian idea of death?
He just doesn't mention the eating death.
Not eating dust.
That's about it. That's
Yeah.
about it.
No eating dust, although that's in other Old Testament texts as well. But yeah, there's definitely this similarity that death is a place of no hope at all in the Old Testament. This is Isaiah 14. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. This is a taunt that Isaiah is giving to the king of Babylon, because the king of Babylon is super powerful, but Isaiah says to him, Sheol is beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. Sheol is kind of the Hebrew word for the netherworld, the land of the dead. It rouses the shades to greet you. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. So the land of the dead is not a good place, and in fact, it seems like Isaiah is taking some pleasure in the idea that this really strong, evil king is going to face the same fate as everyone that he fought against. Okay, but how about this? Right, this is Psalm 6. Turn, O Lord, deliver my life. Save me for the sake of your steadfast love. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise? Any notice any similarities, differences? You can't do that, yeah. So it's a little bit of a similarity, right, to, except that it seems like God might care a little bit more about the dead, as we'll see. This is Amos 9. If they dig into Sheol, from there shall my hand take them. This is talking about Israel, which is sinning against God, and nevertheless God is going to be faithful to them. If they dig into Sheol, from there shall my hand take them. If they climb up to heaven, from there I will bring them down. So it seems like the netherworld is actually a place that you can return from. Or at least, I mean, maybe this is, what's it called? Hyperbole? Like maybe this is poetic, like metaphorical language, but eventually we get to the point in the New Testament where this really does become literal. Like God actually does save us from the netherworld. Good. And then Psalm 139, if I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. This is a radical verse. Why is this so radical? That God is in the netherworld. Like you cannot escape God even in death. That's really kind of a crazy verse. And finally, this is Isaiah 25. Does someone want to read Isaiah 25? Set state, if you can see it.
On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined. And he will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord
So what's the takeaway from this verse?
No death.
That death will be defeated, that Sheol is destroyed. And there's like some rumblings of that in Canaanite religion. For instance, it's called the Baalu myth, which is the story about how Baal is awesome, right? It's where Baal like defeats the god of Motu and Yamu, the god of death and the god of the sea. But that's something that's cyclical. In fact, that it's meant to represent the cycle of nature, that it goes from winter, which is death, to spring, which is new life, to summer, which is continued life, and then to fall again, where you fall into death again. That this is something that happens over and over again, whereas this is saying, once and for all, God will destroy death entirely, which is a really radical thing, unprecedented in the ancient Near East. So now we get to the New Testament. So the primary influence on Jewish Greek by the first century was the Septuagint Greek translation of the Old Testament. Kind of in the same way that like one of our biggest influences on modern English is the King James Version, right? So the Septuagint Greek translation is probably the main way that Jews would have had access to Greek. And so when they speak Greek, they really speak the Greek of the Septuagint, which is the translation that they had in Greek. So therefore, the primary influence on the New Testament understanding of the netherworld, or Hades, is not Greek mythology, but the Old Testament understanding of Sheol. So when they speak of Hades, they are more likely talking about the definition that you find in the Old Testament of Sheol, because Sheol is translated as Hades in the Greek Septuagint. And so that's probably a greater influence. However, obviously, in the 500 years between the Old Testament and New Testament, and the fact that they translated into a new language, it did pick up some of the ideas of Hades in between the Old Testament and New Testament. So early Greek and Roman afterlife, Homer's description of the afterlife, or Hades, is very similar to the Mesopotamian one. So, the idea is, and as we saw with property ownership, right, the whole idea is you go down to death. It's not a good place. Everyone faces it, and you just want to avoid it at all costs. The idea is that the soul is divorced from the body. Notice how that's similar to the Egyptian idea of the afterlife. Hades is the fate of all, but there's a little bit less emphasis on ancestry or the cult of the dead. So for the Greeks, there wasn't a whole lot of way that you could improve your lot in death with the actions of the living. Later developments, because the Greeks had their own couple thousand-year history. Later developments included increased understanding of judgment of good and evil. That maybe if you're a good person in life, you might have a better time in the afterlife than if you're a really bad person. But ultimately, you don't want to be dead. That's the worst fate, right? Someone want to read from the Iliad?
There came to him the hapless Patroclus, in all things like his very self. And he stood above Achilles' head and said, "You sleep, and you have forgotten me, Achilles. In my life you were mindful of me, but now you forget me in death." Achilles held out his arm to clasp the spirit, but in vain. It vanished like a wisp of smoke and went
Gibbering.
underground. Achilles leapt in amazement. He beat his... I'm going around your head, Joey.
Oh, sorry.
He beat his hands together and cried, "Ah, then, it is true that something of us does survive, even in the halls of Hades.
I'll
With no
yeah, try.
intellect at all, only the ghost and semblance."
Of something. But you get the idea. Like death is really bad, but something of you does survive. And there's something to be, like, everyone is forgotten in death, and that's bad, right? Good. Now, Plato is a revolution in the Greek understanding of the afterlife. So Plato, just like all the Greeks, believed that the soul never returns from death. So, but that the soul is immortal. So that's really no different from the rest of the Greeks. But Plato saw the body as a kind of prison for the soul. So in fact, it's much better to be freed from death. So where the traditional Greeks believed death is a terrible thing, you want to avoid it at all costs, you're eating dust practically, just like in Mesopotamian Levant. Plato believed that you had to free your soul from death, that really what it really means to be you is something completely divorced from your body, right? And in fact, you can prepare your soul to enjoy the afterlife now by doing philosophy and doing good things. That you can kind of change your soul around goodness, but if you can also warp your soul by doing bad things. And in the end, like that can actually improve your lot in the afterlife. That this is not. There's no like judgment in afterlife, unlike what we believe as Christians, but instead that your afterlife is determined, in fact, by your own soul, right? A good person would never choose to return from death, but there may be a process of reincarnation. So if you have truly prepared your soul for death, then you will have enjoyed it so much that you would never choose to return. But Plato hypothesized, not really sure of himself, maybe there's a way to be reincarnated, and that's kind of like the cycle that leads to freedom from the body. Right, and notice that's really kind of similar to Hinduism. So Plato, compared to the rest of the traditional Greeks, believed that Hades was actually a good place, and you should desire Hades to some extent. Now, it's a lot of what we talk about from the Bible actually, in its original context, was written against Plato, but we actually, as Christians for 2,000 years, have had a little bit of a fascination with Plato, and sometimes our own afterlife theology comes more from Plato than from the Bible. So that's an interesting thing that we'll talk about more about. Now, of course, there's diversity. So Jewish, Roman, and Greek understandings of afterlives were not unanimous. So Epicureans believed that there was no life after death. Traditional Greeks believed in a terrifying Hades, and Platonists believed in a good Hades. Pharisees believed in the resurrection, Sadducees, and most Hellenistic Jews did not. So, of course, there's some diversity here. The resurrection of the dead was unique to the Jews in that death is totally reversed. So, Platonists believe that you can die and it can be kind of fine, because, you have a soul that lives on forever, right? The Jews believed that, at least common Jews, because of course, there's diversity there too, that in death, death can be totally reversed by the resurrection. And they believe that happened in history at the end of time, in the final judgment. When the Messiah comes, then people will be raised from the dead and live in this new kingdom. Those that are loyal to the covenant are raised from the dead, but those who are not are destroyed along with the Gentiles. The God that made the world out of nothing can surely raise his people from the nothing of death. So if God can make the world out of nothing and people have become nothing, then maybe God is so loyal to his covenant that he will bring something out of nothing once more and recreate us and resurrect us into new life. So this is in the background of the Old Testament, beginning in verses like Isaiah 25, which we already read, and Daniel 12, but also continues especially in between the Old and New Testaments in the intertestamental period. So for instance, in Daniel 12, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So resurrection is kind of a new thing in the in the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the intertestamental period. It was also a political doctrine. So if God raises people from the dead that are faithful to him, that means it's fine, it makes sense to sacrifice your life now for life from the dead, right? So if it's better to be destroyed now instead of being destroyed later, so to be martyred now instead of being destroyed later, than to save your life now and be destroyed in the resurrection, right? It was especially popular among the poor, like the Zealots, but not among Hellenistic Jews and Sadducees, who tend to be a little bit more wealthy and believed more in Platonism or Epicureanism. So this is, someone will read 2 Maccabees. This is the speech of a guy who is refusing to eat pork at the prompting of a Greek king.
You accursed wretch! You dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his law.
So this guy is basically saying, and this is a story of, this is a whole chapter of 2 Maccabees 7 of, I think it's like 7 brothers and their mother who all die for the sake of the Torah and have all of these like super cool speeches like this one. Like, okay, you're going to kill us now, but just you wait because you're going to get judged and we're going to be raised from the dead. Right? So it becomes kind of a political doctrine. It means that we can resist these empires because God will raise us up in the end.
It's just all of the martyr theology.
Right, yes, absolutely.
That really is people that go through the Quran,
Right.
study the for the crusade, what the Pope said, if you die
Mm-hmm.
for the cause of Christ, then, that's what you call the grace of martyrdom.
Yeah.
You go directly to heaven.
Yeah, so it's not surprising that, religions that have an idea of the resurrection have a stronger theology of martyrdom, exactly. Now, Christian doctrine is that there will be a resurrection from the dead, but in fact, it's already started with Christ. So the Jewish theology is that at the end of history, there's going to be a resurrection from the dead for all of those who are righteous, right? Whereas for Christians, the radical, crazy new thing that Christians said is that the resurrection of the dead has already happened in Christ. It's already started, right? So we are already living in the end of the world, in the end of the age, where the resurrection has happened. But we're waiting for the true end of the world, right? So we live in the in the time after the Messiah, hoping for when a final bodily resurrection happens. So Jesus was only the first to be raised from the dead, and the Messianic kingdom and the end of the world has already started. That's the crazy, that would have been completely insane. In fact, it was called foolishness when Christians preached it. So, for instance, Galatians, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. In other words, I have already died, right, with Christ, and I have already been raised with Christ. So now I live through Christ. That's my real life. And that's kind of, saying, okay, the resurrection has already happened, the judgment has already happened, and we have been judged righteous because we live through Christ. So he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. So he's only the first to have been raised from the dead. And we, in baptism, have also been raised from the dead and are waiting for a more full bodily resurrection from the dead. So Romans 6, I will not read this whole thing, but the whole idea is that the baptism is the beginning of this resurrection from the dead, right? That we die in baptism and are raised from the dead. So this was foolishness to the Greeks, as Paul says, and a stumbling block to Jews. So why would the resurrection seem foolish to the Greeks, especially, let's say, Platonists, those who followed Plato?
They didn't believe the body was really of any value
Yeah.
at all. It's just the soul that has value.
Right, exactly.
So why would you want to raise this body that's basically prison?
Yeah, exactly. So Plato would say, you don't want to be raised from the dead. Well, you don't want a body. You want to be saved from your prison of the body and instead be a soul forever, right? But Christians said, no, not only do you want to be raised from the dead with a body, in fact, it's already happened. You now live with a new body because you have been joined with Christ who died and was raised from the dead. Yeah, it's foolish to the Greeks because they didn't think you should want to be raised from the dead. Why would it be a stumbling block to the Jews, this resurrection from the dead?
They didn't believe in resurrection.
Didn't happen at the end of time.
Yeah, so you're right. Some Jews didn't believe in the resurrection, in which case, it would be a stumbling block because they didn't believe people were raised from the dead. Some Jews thought, okay, there's going to be a resurrection, but that happens when the glorious new kingdom of God comes, right? And all the Gentiles are defeated and our enemies are gone and Jerusalem is this big, huge city. But instead, right, the resurrection already came right? But it came because, before like Jerusalem is this super powerful city where all the glory comes to it. So that's a really big deal. Like it would have probably been a disappointment to a lot of Jews that it didn't come the way they wanted it to, and they had to kind of get used to that whole idea. Good. Notice, by the way, right, this is a lot of times the way that we think of the afterlife is, okay, I die, and then I become a disembodied soul or spirit, and I go up to heaven, and then that's it, right? That's it, right? But Christians preached from the very beginning notice how that's actually very similar to Plato. But Christians preached from the very beginning something that was foolishness to people like that, right? That we will die, and we do have a spirit that goes up to heaven, but in the end, what we're really looking forward to is that Christ raises us from the dead, and that we have a new body, right? That's 1 Corinthians 15 is pretty extensive about that. So the New Testament is not Plato. The afterlife is not about going to heaven when you die, although that is real. It is about being raised from the dead with a body in the final judgment. So love is stronger than death. There is a time before death, and there will be a time after death. God will surely conquer death and save us from it. In fact, he already has by baptism. Life after death starts now. Before Jesus, God had revealed that he would raise us up from the dead in the last day, but the resurrection of Jesus means that the last day has already started. It's right here now. We have already died with Christ, and we already have life after death with Christ, even now. This is totally unexpected and is the crazy good news of the gospel. Good. That's question 1. Do we want to do another one?
Let's save that.
All right, we'll save for next time. But very fun. It's always fun.
We would start calling him Professor Gilly. Professor Gilly, and by the way, I did not know this, but there's a place in India that you can take your dying relatives to. They spend astronomical amounts of money. It's kind of like a great hospice place. That if you die in that location, it is believed you will escape the cycle of
Wow.
reincarnation and go ahead and reach that state of
Nirvana or whatever, yeah. Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
So Jesus is our place of
Yeah, exactly.
so.
Yeah, and we were raised from the dead. Awesome.
All right.
Yay. See you guys next time.